Welcome to MRA's webinar on the use of compost in the ERF. First, we will hear about the benefits of compost in agricultural systems. Then there is a discussion on how compost use fits into the ERF and the awarding of carbon accounting units. This webinar goes for about half an hour. You do not have to watch it all in one go. You can stop at any time and come back to where you left off. I trust you will enjoy it and come to understand how compost and the ERF can work for you.
Hi, and welcome to the webinar. Today, we'll be taking a look at how compost can be used to increase soil carbon for crops and pastures, the benefits of increasing soil carbon, and the opportunity to earn carbon credits through soil carbon sequestration by the Emissions Reduction Fund. This project has been funded by the New South Wales Government's Waste Less, Recycle More Fund to promote demand for recycled organics by increasing awareness of the ERF measurement of soil carbon sequestration in agricultural systems method. The information provided in this webinar does not constitute financial or legal advice. Let's start with a basic introduction on climate change. The greenhouse effect is a natural process that warms the Earth's surface. When the sun's energy reaches the Earth's atmosphere, some of it is reflected back to space, and the rest is absorbed and radiated by greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases include water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, ozone, and some artificial chemicals such as chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. The absorbed energy warms the atmosphere and the surface of the Earth. This process maintains the Earth's temperature at around 33 degrees Celsius warmer than it would otherwise be, allowing life on Earth to exist. The problem we now face is that human activities, particularly the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas, emissions from agriculture, which are largely increased, methane production from ruminants, and land clearing are increasing the concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This is the enhanced greenhouse effect, which is contributing to the warming of the Earth. What can be done to reverse this effect? One possible action is to capture the CO2 in the air and put it back into the soil as soil organic carbon. This can be done through nature's natural system of recycling carbon, the CO2 cycle. Carbon cycles through trees, plants, and animals, which then decay in soil. CO2 cycles through animals, trees, and plants as carbohydrates. When these organisms die and naturally break down, carbon enters the soil as soil organic matter, or soil organic carbon. Compost made from organic waste that are applied to soil will mimic this natural cycle, and carbon can be captured in soil as soil organic carbon. This has the added bonus of improving the soil condition with subsequent benefits to production. Soil organic matter is the organic matter component of the soil and consists of plant and animal residues in various stages of decay. It includes fresh and living organisms, which constitutes about 15%, decomposing material, which makes up 45%, and 40% is completely decayed and stable material. Soil organic matter plays an important role in soil fertility and has effects on soil chemistry, physics, and biology. Chemically, it contributes to the cation exchange capacity, enhances pH buffering, serves as a reservoir of nutrients, promotes binding of organic matter to minerals, and attenuates the impacts of salinity. In regards to soil physics, soil carbon can improve structural stability, increase water holding capacity, improve friability and tilth, and alter thermal properties of the soil. Biologically, soil carbon provides a source of energy for soil microbes, contributes to biological control of diseases, and provides a habitat for microbes. Soil organic matter contains soil organic carbon. SOC is made up of fractions with different degrees of stability or availability. The labeled fraction is the active fraction, being consumed by microbes The resistant fraction is a suggested resistance to any further microbial breakdown. It is very stable carbon, not really cycling any further. It has become stored carbon, like charcoal or even coal. The humic fraction lies in between. It is the important fraction for improving soil condition. It is the fraction that is capable of holding high volumes of water and nutrients, providing habitat and food for microbes and influencing soil particle stability, reducing risk of erosion. Why would you put compost or any organic matter in soil? Australian soils are particularly poor, both in terms of general plant nutrients, but also organic matter, with undisturbed soils only having about 5% organic matter. With cultivation and farming, organic matter decreases and soils become less fertile. Many areas of farming land, both under pasture and cropping lands, have less than 2% organic matter. Soil carbon is in decline in all agricultural systems that do not actively modify practices to retain or increase carbon or organic matter. There are many practices that can be changed to increase the amount of organic matter retained in the soil. Applying compost is one. So what exactly is compost? Compost is defined as an organic product that has undergone controlled aerobic and thermophilic biological transformation through the composting process to achieve pasteurization and reduce phytotoxic compounds and achieve the specified level of maturity required for compost. Essentially, it can be boiled down to three simple things. Compost is a fertilizer because it contains essential plant nutrients. Compost is a soil conditioner as it improves the physical structure of soil. And it is a biological stimulant as it provides valuable living microorganisms and organic matter that soil microbes feed upon. It works on all three aspects of soil fertility. How can compost help your land? Compost can provide a whole range of chemical, physical, biological, and environmental benefits. Again, it impacts on all aspects of soil health, principally through increasing microbial activity by providing organic matter for microbes to eat. It increases mineralization, it improves soil structure, porosity, and aggregate stability, and increases water holding capacity. Environmentally, it diverts valuable nutrients from being disposed of in landfill, reduces nutrient runoff into waterways, reduces soil erosion, reduces GHG emissions, and can decontaminate polluted soils. Using quality compost is important. The Australian standard for compost, AS 4454, sets limits for certain contaminants and is the minimum that should be accepted for agricultural use. Maturity and stability. The compost should be stable and at a level of maturity that suits the application. AS 4454 sets parameters for maturity and stability. Nutrient content. Compost usually contains significant and beneficial levels of trace elements. On a weight basis, composts are usually a very inexpensive source of trace elements. Heavy metals. Levels are regulated by the EPAs in each state, and AS 4454 sets limits. Weed and diseases. The high temperatures, above 55 degrees Celsius, in the composting process, if correctly carried out, ensures pasteurization. There are many ways soil carbon levels can be improved. For example, growing healthy crops and pastures, switching from cropping to annual pastures, switching to perennial pastures, managing grazing to retain health cover, and of course, using compost and other recycled organics, which provide a direct source of organic matter, build soil structure, and provide a food source to drive microbial activity in soil. There are many commercial composters producing sufficient quantity of compost. This can be tailored to suit crop requirements. This value-added compost can be used to replace part or all of the crop nutrient requirements. Compost can be applied prior to crop planting annually with each crop or in line with a routine fertilizer program. In addition, pelletizing granular forms of compost are becoming available to be applied through an air seeder when sowing, simplifying and reducing spreading costs. In short, compost increases soil organic matter and benefits soil health and productivity in complex ways. And that brings us to the next part of this webinar. How can farmers apply compost to land to earn carbon credits through the Emissions Reduction Fund? The Emissions Reduction Fund, or the ERF in short, is a $2.5 billion fund established to meet Australia's 2020 emissions reduction target of 5% below 2000 levels by 2020. It is a voluntary scheme and is intended to incentivize emissions reductions by businesses and local governments and to reduce costs associated with such changes. Each emissions reduction project that delivers emissions reductions will be issued 1 Australian Carbon Credit Unit, ACCU, for every tonne of carbon dioxide emissions reductions delivered. Credits can be sold to the government through a reverse auction or to the secondary market. The average ACCU price in the last auction was $14.17 per ACCU, while the current average price on the secondary market is close to $17 or $18 per ACCU. In 2019, the government invested another $2 billion to the Climate Solutions Fund, which is essentially a continuation of the Emissions Reduction Fund. This means that the government has committed to continue purchasing ACCUs, and reverse auctions will continue to be held for the foreseeable future. Under the ERF, there are a number of prescribed methodologies or methods that describe the types of projects that can claim ACCUs. The measurement of soil carbon sequestration in agricultural systems method, or the soil carbon method in short, is one such method which allows generation of credits from soil carbon sequestration. It was introduced in early 2018 and is based on previous soil carbon methods with reduced barriers to entry, such as increased range of eligible farming systems, including cropping, grazing, and horticultural production systems. On a broad level, the ERF consists of 3 stages. First is a registration of the project proponent. Next is a carry-out of the project to generate credits. And finally, once the credits have been issued, they can be sold either to the government, the secondary market, or via an aggregator. We'll get into more detail on each of these steps shortly. Before we get into detail, some important terminology. Baseline period means the 10 years immediately prior to a project application being made. In soil carbon sequestration projects, stored carbon can be released back into the atmosphere, reversing the environmental benefit. For this reason, soil carbon projects are subject to the risk of reversal buffer and permanence obligations to maintain carbon stores. The risk of reversal buffer reduces all ACCUs issued for sequestration projects by 5%. Carbon stored by a project must be maintained for either 25 years or 100 years. Once a permanence period has been nominated, it cannot be varied. If the 25-year period is chosen, any ACCUs issued for the project will be discounted by 20%, in addition to the risk of reversal buffer. If loss of carbon occurs, the land must be managed to allow the carbon stock to return to previously reported values, or the ACCUs equivalent to the loss must be relinquished to the regulator. First stage, identify the project. Determine the project proponent. The project proponent can be the landowner, the lessee, the aggregator, or a joint proponent. Register the project proponent as an offset entity. Open an ANRU account, which can be thought of as a bank account for ACCUs. The first step is to identify what project you wish to carry out on your land. The soil carbon methodology allows for the following activities: nutrients to land, synthetic or non-synthetic fertilizer to address a material deficiency, lime to remediate acid soils, gypsum to remediate sodic or magnesic soils, new irrigation, re-establish, rejuvenate pasture by seeding, establishing and maintaining a pasture where there was none, altering the stocking rate, duration, or intensity of grazing, retaining stubble after a crop is harvested, converting from intensive tillage to none, modifying landscape to remediate land, soil landscape modification, mechanical means to add or redistribute soil through the soil profile, soil landscape modification. All of these activities can be used either singly or in conjunction. It is important, if you are considering undertaking a project under the ERF, that you only commence these activities once the project is registered. Compost application fits into the first activity. There are some activities that are specifically excluded, as these are known to damage the environment or do not contribute to soil increases or improvement to land management generally. Activities that must not be conducted include those listed here: de-stocking of land under pasture, unless the land is converted to be a cropping system, applying ineligible non-synthetic fertilizers, application of soil amendments containing coal, application of pyrolyzed material that is not biochar. Land management activities must not be conducted on acid sulfate soils, as these are likely to cause physical disturbance and lead to environmental risks. Any activities carried out must be carried out on eligible land. You will have to nominate the areas of land you wish to carry out the activity and carefully map the project area. The project area must meet the following requirements: during the whole of the baseline period, 10 years prior, the land must have been used for pasture, cropping, bare fallow, was not and is not forest land, no dwellings or other structures on the land, not subject to drainage of a wetland. Parcel of land within your nominated project area that doesn't meet these requirements must be excluded. Once you've identified a potential project, you have to decide who will be the project proponent. The project proponent is legally responsible for the project and any consequences related to the project and its compliance with regulatory requirements. This is particularly important when a project could involve multiple participants or have multiple stakeholders. The roles and responsibilities of each participant or stakeholder should be defined, and if possible, get this in writing in the form of MOUs or contracts. One of the key requirements that will have to be demonstrated during project registration and throughout the life of the project is a legal right to carry out the project. Legal right means the right to carry out the project activities on or for the sites or assets included in the project, and a lawful and exclusive right to be issued all accus that may be created as a result of the project activities. Get this in writing from all relevant stakeholders. Next comes the actual meat and bones of any ERF project: carrying out the project and generating credits. Register the project, run the project, report every 6 months to 5 years, commission audits, and submit applications to receive credits. First, register the project on the CER client portal. Information required for registration: demonstrate newness and demonstrate legal right. Next, run the project. Carry out land management activity. Carry out sampling as required. Draft an offsets report every 6 months to 5 years. Audit if applicable. Projects are required to undergo periodic audits. ensure project is run in accordance with legislation. And lastly, apply to receive accus. You can register your project by logging onto the CER client portal and completing the registration forms online. At registration, you'll need to provide the following details. Specify the project area. Nominate the permanence obligation period. Detailed description of land management activities that were carried during the baseline period. Detailed description of the eligible management activities that will be carried out until the end of the permanence obligation period. Detailed explanation of how the eligible management activities are eligible and will increase carbon abatement. Evidence that all land is eligible land. Land management strategies. The CER takes up to 90 days to assess applications, and each time the CER comes back to you for further information, it adds another 90 days to the assessment timeframe. For this reason, it is recommended that applicants register their projects as early as possible. The next important step is to engage a land management expert to prepare the land management strategy that will describe and guide the project. Once this is prepared, it completely governs what is to be done on the project site. Activities that are not listed in the LMS will not be allowed on the project site. So this must be very carefully prepared, as it will govern activities for 10 to 20 years at least. Prepared by an independent person experienced in agronomy, plant nutrition, provision of agricultural production advice, strategy must cover all management activities to be conducted, record keeping and monitoring requirements, reviewed every 5 years during crediting period, reviewed every 10 years during permanence obligation period. Proponent and relevant landholders must agree to implement land management strategy. The strategy will have to be provided at project registration, so you will need to engage an expert early to prepare the LMS in time for registration. Once the application has been approved and the project is officially registered, you can actually start to run the project. Running the project consists of carrying out your nominated land management activities and soil carbon sampling throughout the life of the project. The next step is to sample the land to determine the baseline levels of SOC. It is very important that sampling properly assesses the land so that a representative baseline SOC is recorded. The final ACCU delivery will rely on this baseline level to assess any SOC increases. The sampling rules are very strict. The baseline sampling round must occur within the first reporting period, and subsequent sampling rounds are to be carried out during each reporting period, including the first. Within your project area, you must include at least one carbon estimation area, which remains fixed for the permanence obligation period. Each carbon estimation area must be divided into at least 3 strata. Sampling must be taken up to 30 centimeters or greater, with at least 3 samples per strata at random locations. The sampling must be carried out by an independent person. Sampling costs may vary according to the size of the land and the service provider, but are around $10,000 for every 500 hectares. This is an example of a sampling plan showing at least 3 randomly located sampling points within each strata within the carbon estimation area. You need to regularly report on your project to the Clean Energy Regulator with offsets reports. An offsets report must cover a reporting period of between 6 months and 5 years and must list the details of the activities carried out during the reporting period and the achieved sequestration. Reports must be submitted no later than 6 months after the end of a reporting period onto the CER client portal. Projects are required to be periodically audited to ensure that the project is being carried out in accordance with the methodology. when a project is registered, the Clean Energy Regulator issues an audit schedule that specifies the number of audits required over the life of the project. Initial audits can cost anywhere between $20,000 to $40,000, depending on the scale and complexity of the project, while subsequent audits may be around the $15,000 mark. Note that audits are not funded by the regulator. Project proponents or their partners are responsible for commissioning audits. Proponents will need to appoint a registered greenhouse and energy auditor. You can find a list of this on the CER website. Once you've completed your offsets report in any applicable audits, you can submit an application for a certificate of entitlement for accus generated from the reporting period. Like registration, it can take up to 90 days for the regulator to approve, and each request for information adds another 90 days to the assessment timeframe. Once the application has been approved, the CER will issue accus into the proponent's ANREU account. Project cost may vary depending on the size and complexity of the project, but the major costs on the ERF side of the project involve the preparation of the land management strategy, sampling, offsets reporting, and auditing. These costs are additional to the cost of carrying out the chosen land management activities and should be carefully considered before choosing to participate in the ERF. This is a visualization of what a soil carbon timeline would look like. Once a project has been registered, the crediting period begins from the nominated start date. Baseline sampling occurs once in the first reporting period, and subsequent sampling occurs in every reporting period. Each reporting period can be between 6 months to 5 years, and the offsets report for the reporting period must be submitted no later than 6 months after the end of the reporting period. The end of the crediting period is followed by the permanence obligation period of up to 25 or 100 years. Accus generated by a project can be sold for cash. Accus can be sold back to the government through a carbon abatement contract via reverse auctions. Accus can be sold on the secondary market, or accus can generate revenue via an aggregator. Each of these has their advantages and disadvantages. Getting into a CAC means that you have a guaranteed accu price for a certain amount of accus, but you will be obliged to meet the contracted delivery amount. If you face a shortfall of accus generated from your project and are not able to meet the contracted delivery amount, you will have to source or buy accus from elsewhere. If you choose not to get a CAC, you can sell accus generated from your project on the secondary market. You may be able to take advantage of potentially high accu prices without contract risk. But the other side of the coin is that accu prices on the secondary market are subject to market volatility. The other option is to partner with an aggregator who can assist in delivering your project. Project aggregators work closely with proponents to develop and deliver projects and can provide economies of scale that may make smaller projects viable. Revenue from accu generation is usually shared with the aggregator and the proponent. To get into a carbon abatement contract with the regulator, you will need to participate and be successful in an ERF reverse auction. Bidders propose a quantity of accus and a price at which they would want to be paid per accu, and the Clean Energy Regulator commits to buy the accus at the lowest prices. Successful bidders enter into a contract with the CER, committing to deliver the specified number of accus by the specified date at the agreed price. Reverse auctions have historically been held twice a year. To participate in an auction, the project registration application must be submitted no later than 30 days before the auction. Auction qualification forms must then be submitted 25 days before the auction. The qualification form requires details of the project and the expected abatement and contract term. Auction registration forms must be submitted 5 days before the auction and require participants to commit to a delivery schedule. And finally, during the auction, participants submit their bids, and successful participants enter into a CAC. To maximize chance of success in an ERF auction, participants should bid the lowest price at which it is worthwhile to undertake the project. Consider the CAPEX and OPEX of carrying out the proposed project along with forecast emissions to determine a competitive bid price that should at least cover expenses and provide a reasonable margin. The CER's benchmark price also needs to be considered. At every auction, the CER has a unique confidential benchmark price that is not disclosed. Projects that are above the benchmark will not be selected. Seek financial advice before finalizing and submitting a bid. If a participant's bid is successful at auction, the participant enters into a carbon abatement contract with the government. A carbon abatement contract is a contractual arrangement to provide a specified number of ACCUs at a set price for the duration of the contract. While the total ACCUs must be delivered by the end of the contract, the CER may allow for some flexibilities. CAC participants are allowed a 20% shortfall of ACCUs at each delivery, but at the end of the contract, the total contracted amount must be provided. Delivery dates and scheduled delivery amounts can also be varied with an approval from the CER if reasonable. The CACs are also blind to the source of ACCUs. Therefore, if a project is not generating the expected amount of ACCUs, proponents can buy ACCUs from the secondary market to meet the CAC requirements. The final delivery date cannot be varied, and the total agreed quantity must be delivered by the final delivery date. ACCUs can also be sold on the secondary market. Demand for ACCUs on the secondary market can come from a variety of players, such as organizations looking to offset their own emissions to obtain carbon neutral status, other project proponents who need to overcome shortfalls, or large greenhouse gas emitters who have exceeded their emissions thresholds. Under the Emissions Reduction Fund, it is possible to bring multiple projects together in a process known as aggregation. Aggregators are agents, project developers, holding companies or consultants that provide services to facilitate participation in the ERF, reduce compliance and transaction costs by providing economies of scale, and help manage compliance and performance risks. Aggregation can occur in two ways, either at the project level or the contract level. An aggregated project groups together projects using the same method. The projects can be delivered by different organizations on different sites. An aggregated project may either participate in an ERF auction or sell ACCUs on the secondary market. The project aggregator could be an agent, project developer, holding company, or even one of the project participants. In this arrangement, the project aggregator is ultimately responsible for executing the project, delivering the ACCUs and liaising with the clean energy regulator. When participating in an ERF auction, projects can be grouped under a single bid made by an aggregator. An aggregated contract can include projects using different carbon abatement methods. The contract aggregator is responsible for the delivery of the ACCUs to the CER under the CAC. The CER does not intervene in commercial arrangements defining how the financial cost and benefits, including performance risk, are allocated amongst the parties. The key component of an aggregated project is the aggregation agreement, which is a legal document. An aggregation agreement is entered between the project proponent, who can also be an aggregator, and the site owner. The Federal Department of the Environment has published full guidance on how to meet best practice when entering into private aggregation agreements. While private aggregation agreements are not a requirement of the ERF, In practice, it is always recommended to establish a contract between the parties that participate in the aggregated project, detailing the rights and responsibilities of each. The agreement should, as minimum, establish the party responsible for contracting with the CER, document legal ownership rights of the project, define responsibilities for other approvals and decision-making, describe the project, site, dates, and activities to be undertaken, establish minimum performance requirements, KPIs, for each party, clarify roles around data collection, analysis, and monitoring, ensure all potential risk areas are managed through allocation of responsibility to the appropriate party, define the revenue and cost sharing structure, clarify future actions and responsibilities for potential scenarios. Refer to this slide for a summary of how a registered project under the ERF can generate ACCUs. For further information, please contact info@mraconsulting.com.au. The project is supported by the New South Wales Government through the Waste Less, Recycle More initiative, funded from the Waste Levy.
Thank you for listening. I trust you have gained some insight into compost and the ERF. If you would like more information, please don't hesitate to contact us.